So, to start this deep dive, I want you to picture the date, May 14th, 1796. You're standing out in the rolling green hills of rural England.
Oh, this is such a wild story to start with.
It really is. So there's this local British physician, Edward Jenner, and he's looking at a perfectly healthy 8-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Jenner takes this sharp medical instrument, a lancet, and he deliberately makes 2 small cuts right into the skin of this kid's arm.
And, he's not doing surgery or anything.
No, not at all. He's not cleaning a wound. He literally reaches for a vial of fluid that he harvested himself directly from the oozing infected sores of a local milkmaid's cow.
Which is just viscerally horrifying to think about now.
Oh, completely. And he rubs that infected cow fluid right into the boy's open cuts.
I mean, it is easily one of the most audacious, terrifying, and honestly consequential moments in all of human history.
Yeah, because if you look at that scene through a modern lens, it's just absolute madness. I mean, there's no ethics board, there's no sterile lab.
Definitely no informed consent.
Exactly. It's just a doctor, a kid, and this incredibly dangerous gamble. But, to understand why Jenner did this, we have to look at the sheer terror of that era. He wasn't trying to cure a cold.
No, he was dealing with smallpox. And we really have to remember that smallpox was just total devastation.
Yeah.
It was this highly lethal, intensely disfiguring disease that had been stalking humanity for centuries, right? It didn't care about borders or social class.
If it hit a town, the mortality rate was just staggering.
Exactly. And the people who did survive were often left blind or just covered in these deep, permanent scars. It was basically the monster under the bed for every parent on Earth.
But Jenner had noticed something really curious. The local milkmaids, the women milking the cows all day, they never seemed to catch smallpox.
Right. Or if they did, it was incredibly rare.
What they did catch was cowpox, which was this much milder disease they'd get from the cow's udders. They get like a few sores, maybe a mild fever, and then they'd recover.
So Jenner comes up with this hypothesis. He thinks this mild cowpox infection is somehow acting as a biological shield against the deadly smallpox.
Which brings us back to the 8-year-old boy. Jenner infects him with the cowpox extract.
And as you'd expect, the boy gets a mild fever, feels a bit gross for a few days, and then recovers completely.
But Jenner doesn't stop there. And this is where it gets so intense.
It really does.
Weeks later, he takes a new lancet. But this time, he's not using mild cowpox. He deliberately infects this boy with the actual deadly, full-blown smallpox virus.
He literally introduces the biggest killer of the era directly into a child's bloodstream.
You can just imagine the tension in the room in the days after that. But the crazy thing is, the boy didn't get sick.
Right. He didn't get the horrific pustules. He didn't get the fever.
He was completely protected. That first cowpox infection had somehow, taught his body how to defeat smallpox.
And that direct, very visceral experiment basically proved the whole concept of inoculation. I mean, it paved the way for the total global eradication of smallpox.
And what I absolutely love about this story is the linguistic footprint it left. So the Latin word for cow is vacca.
Right.
And the medical term for cowpox was vaccinia. So Jenner, using cowpox to protect a kid, literally gave birth to the word we use every day, vaccination.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Every time we say vaccine, whether it's polio or tetanus, we are paying homage to an 18th century English cow.
It's such a profound legacy. But, to truly appreciate how Jenner's crazy experiment evolved into the highly engineered public health schedules we use today, we can't just skip to the modern clinic.
Right. We have to build the foundation first.
Exactly. We have to understand the biological machinery he accidentally tapped into. We really need to define the terms of this microscopic battlefield.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. If you're preparing for medical exams, or you're a practitioner reviewing your clinical basics, or you're just fascinated by how we survive on a microbial level, you are in the right place.
We're going to cover a lot of ground today.
We are. We're going to lock down the foundational vocabulary of immunology, map out our vaccine arsenal, navigate the intricate schedules for vulnerable populations, and then see how all of this theory actually survives reality by looking at the turbulent history of public health in Nigeria.
It is a massive landscape. So let's start by laying that concrete foundation. Let's look at the vocabulary.
Let's unpack this lexicon of defense. We have 5 core definitions that people mix up in casual conversation all the time. But clinically, they have very distinct meanings.
Right. We've got immunity, the immune system, vaccines, vaccination, and immunization.
Getting these right is critical, not just for passing a pharmacology test, but for understanding what's actually happening inside a patient.
Absolutely. So let's start with the widest lens, which is immunity. Immunity is essentially a state of being. It's the body's ability to tolerate indigenous materials, so the tissues and cells that belong to you, and rapidly eliminate foreign materials.
The stuff that absolutely does not belong.
Ex-
I always picture it as this ultimate biological border control. It has this huge database of who is a citizen, and it's ruthlessly efficient at deporting anyone without a passport.
That's a perfect analogy. And the entity that's actively running that border control is our second term, the immune system.
The physical infrastructure.
Right. It's a vast network of organs, tissues, and specialized cells. Your bone marrow, thymus, spleen, white blood cells. Its one job is to constantly patrol the body, identify harmful foreign substances, which we call antigens, and destroy them.
And it does that using antibodies in those specialized cells, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so immunity is the concept, the state of being protected, and the immune system is the physical machinery. But what if we don't want to wait for a deadly pathogen to show up to train that machinery?
That's where we get to our third definition, vaccines. A vaccine is basically biological intelligence. Historically and clinically, a vaccine is a substance derived from an infection-causing microorganism.
But obviously you don't just inject raw, lethal disease into someone.
Right, no. Through lab manipulation, the microorganism is made to lose its virulence.
It's pathogenicity.
Yeah.
Like its actual ability to make you sick.
Precisely. We strip away its ability to harm you, but, and this is the genius part, it keeps the structural characteristics needed to stimulate an immune response.
So it tricks the body.
Exactly. It tricks the body into producing those defensive antibodies and sensitized cells without putting the host in any genuine danger. You're handing your immune system the blueprints and the uniform of the enemy so they know what to look for.
Without actually letting the enemy into the fortress.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And that sets up my analogy for the final two terms perfectly. These are the ones people confuse the most. Vaccination versus immunization.
They are very different clinically.
So listeners, let's clarify this. Think of your immune system as a country's military defense force. Vaccination is the training drill. It's the actual physical process of introducing the vaccine into a host.
The needle piercing the arm or the drops in the mouth.
Right. It's the action. The goal is to introduce the dummy target to start the response.
And that distinction is why clinical exactness is so important. Vaccination is what the healthcare provider does. But just because you perform the action, it doesn't mean the body responds the way you want.
Yeah, because there's so many variables.
So many. The patient's age, their immune status, the route of administration, the type of vaccine, and critically, the potency of the vaccine when it's given.
You could have flawless technique, right? Muscle, everything. But if the vial was left in the sun and lost its potency, the biological outcome just won't happen.
Exactly. And that desired biological outcome is our fifth term, immunization. If vaccination is the training drill, immunization is the actual state of readiness the troops achieve after the drill.
It's the complex internal process of antibody production.
Yes, which raises a really important clinical question. Can a patient be vaccinated but fail to be immunized?
Absolutely.
Yes, 100%. If someone's immune system is deeply compromised, like with advanced HIV, you can vaccinate them, but the body fails to build the antibodies. The immunization process never happens.
Understanding that vaccination does not guarantee immunization is basically the bedrock of this whole deep dive.
It really is.
So we know we want to achieve immunization. How do we acquire that immunity? The medical literature breaks it down into active immunity and passive immunity.
Active immunity is exactly what it sounds like. Your body does the heavy lifting. Your own immune system develops it in response to an exposure.
Which can happen two ways, right?
Right. Natural exposure, you catch disease, fight it off, survive, and remember it. Or vaccination, where we simulate that war safely.
And the key here is durability. You build your own antibody factories, and it lasts for years, sometimes permanently.
That immune memory is the defining feature. Now, contrast that with passive immunity. This is like importing the goods instead of building the factory. It's when fully formed antibodies are transferred from one person or animal directly to someone else.
And the most beautiful example of this is pregnancy. A mother transfers her own circulating antibodies directly across the placenta to the fetus.
It's an evolutionary masterpiece, honestly. A newborn enters the world completely naive immunologically. If they didn't have the mother's antibodies, they'd be totally defenseless against the microbial world.
And we can replicate this in medicine too, right? with blood products or immune globulin.
Exactly. Like if someone is bitten by a rabid animal, you don't just give them a rabies vaccine and wait weeks for their active immunity to kick in.
Is they die.
They would. You give them rabies immune globulin immediately. You give them a temporary imported army to fight the virus right then and there.
But the massive catch is that it's temporary. Because your body didn't build them, it doesn't know how to make more. Once they degrade, the protection is just gone.
Right. It's an emergency shield, not a long-term survival strategy.
For long-term survival, we need vaccines.
Yeah.
And this is where the pharmacology gets spectacularly brilliant. There are 4 main categories of vaccines. Let's start with the heavy hitters. Live, attenuated vaccines.
So, live attenuated vaccines are derived directly from the actual disease-causing viruses or bacteria, but they're attenuated, which is just a clinical term for weakened.
Right.
They're cultivated in labs under conditions that strip away their viciousness. But what's crucial here is that these weakened pathogens do actually grow and replicate inside the vaccinated person.
Wait, so when you get a live vaccine, you're actively infected?
Technically, yes, but because it's so severely weakened, it causes basically no disease or something so mild you barely notice.
Your immune system just easily surrounds and destroys it.
Exactly. But because it's living and replicating, it's the closest thing to a natural wild infection. So it produces this wildly robust, highly effective immune response.
The training drill feels incredibly real. And usually, just one dose gives lifelong immunity.
Usually, yes. But there's a massive exception practitioners have to memorize. OPV, the oral polio vaccine. It's live attenuated, but it requires multiple doses to ensure full immunity across all 3 types of polio virus.
You got it.
Other classic examples are measles, yellow fever, and the BCG vaccine for tuberculosis. They use the whole organism, so they fall under whole cell vaccines.
Okay, so if live vaccines are the most effective and mostly just need one shot, why do we make anything else? Why not just use live for everything?
It's a very logical question, but it comes down to balancing efficacy with safety and logistics. What if you give a live, replicating virus to a child with leukemia or someone with advanced symptomatic HIV?
Oh, even the weakened virus would be too much for their immune system to handle.
Exactly. Without a functional immune system, it could multiply out of control and be fatal. You just cannot give live vaccines to severely immunocompromised people.
Plus, they're fragile, right?
Very fragile. They require a rigorous, unbroken cold chain, strict refrigeration from the plant in Europe all the way to a remote village. If the power fails, the live vaccine dies and becomes useless water.
So we need safer, tougher alternatives. Which brings us to category 2, inactivated vaccines.
Right. Inactivated vaccines are grown in a culture and then completely killed, usually with high heat or harsh chemicals like formaldehyde.
Dead as a doornail. Zero metabolic activity.
Zero. Because they're dead, they cannot replicate, and they absolutely cannot cause the disease they're designed to prevent. It's biologically impossible.
So you could give them to an immunocompromised patient safely. Examples are IPV, the inactivated polio vaccine, and whole cell pertussis. But the trade-off is a drop in power, right?
Yes. The immune system doesn't see them as a massive threat because they don't replicate. The training drill is shorter, so you almost always need multiple doses and periodic booster shots to keep the protection up.
Okay, so we've got live and inactivated. Both are whole cell. Now let's look at the highly targeted pharmacology.
Yep.
Fractional inactivated vaccines. These are made of just a specific part of the cell.
This is where modern immunology gets incredible. We divide fractional vaccines into protein-based and polysaccharide-based.
Let's do protein-based first. We have subunit vaccines, like a cellular pertussis. They just isolate the surface proteins that trigger the immune system. But then we have toxoid vaccines, like for diphtheria and tetanus. And I love these because they completely flip the script. They don't target the bacteria at all.
It's such a brilliant strategic move. With tetanus, the bacteria itself isn't what causes the horrific muscle spasms. It's the neurotoxin the bacteria secretes once it's inside you.
Right.
So a toxoid vaccine takes that deadly toxin, chemically deactivates it so it's harmless, and uses that as the vaccine. You're teaching the immune system to neutralize the enemy's weapon, not the enemy.
Which renders the bacteria basically harmless.
That's so smart. Okay, now the polysaccharide-based ones. Polysaccharides are basically long chains of sugar molecules that form the outer capsule of certain bacteria, like pneumococcus.
Right. And we use those sugar chains to make vaccines. But pediatricians have a massive physiological hurdle here. Pure polysaccharide vaccines work well in adults, but if you give one to a child under 2 years old, it's almost entirely useless. Why is that? I mean, a sugar chain is foreign. Why wouldn't a baby's body attack it?
It's a developmental biology issue. A child under 2 has an immature immune system. It simply does not recognize these complex, repetitive sugar chains as a threat.
They just look right past it.
Exactly. It's like the bacteria is wearing an invisibility cloak made of sugar. So, to protect infants, scientists had to tear off that invisibility cloak. They created conjugated vaccines, like the Hib vaccine.
I really want to slow down and unpack this because conjugation is one of the most elegant biochemical tricks we have. How do you force a baby's immune system to see something invisible?
Think of it like a reverse Trojan horse. They take that invisible sugar chain and they chemically conjugate it, they bolt it to a highly visible carrier protein, usually a harmless version of the tetanus or diphtheria toxoid.
So they tie the invisible sugar to this neon flashing protein.
Exactly. When you inject it, the baby's immune system immediately spots the carrier protein, sounds the alarm, and attacks it. But because the sugar chain is physically attached, the immune cells are forced to ingest and process the sugar too.
Wow. So the baby's immune system effectively learns to recognize the polysaccharide because it was dragged in with the protein.
You've tricked an immature immune system into building a robust defense against something it would have ignored. It's a masterpiece of engineering.
It really is. And it only gets more advanced with our fourth category, recombinant inactivated vaccines. The classic example is the hepatitis B vaccine, or HBV.
Recombinant vaccines are cutting-edge genetic science. Instead of messing with the dangerous whole hepatitis B virus, scientists isolate the exact snippet of genetic code that builds the virus's surface antigen.
They just cut that line of code right out.
Yes, and they splice that genetic material into the genome of a completely harmless cell, like a common yeast cell.
Wait, like the yeast we use to bake bread?
Very similar, yes. The yeast doesn't know any better. As it naturally feeds and multiplies in these massive fermentation vats, it reads that new DNA and pumps out huge quantities of the hepatitis B surface protein.
We turn harmless yeast into microscopic biological factories?
Exactly. We harvest the yeast, purify away everything but the surface proteins, and put them in a vial. That's the vaccine. Profoundly safe, incredibly effective, and highly scalable.
Okay, so we've mapped out our arsenal. We know how to trigger active immunity in one person. But public health is about populations. What happens when we apply these tools to millions? And what happens when they cause unintended harm?
Right, we have to transition to the epidemiology of the herd. Let's look at herd immunity.
Let's build a worst-case scenario. Imagine a hypothetical viral disease that is 100% contagious. You walk into a room with someone who has it, you are guaranteed to catch it.
An absolute nightmare.
Yeah. Now imagine a crowded city with zero immunity. No vaccines, no natural immunity. Patient zero walks in. What happens?
Total saturation. Patient 0 infects 3 people, they infect 9, they infect 27. The virus faces zero resistance and sweeps through everyone.
Right. Now take that exact same 100% contagious virus, but drop it into a second city where 90% of the population is fully immunized. What happens when patient 0 walks in now?
Patient 0 breathes on someone, but that person is vaccinated. Their immune system destroys the virus. The transmission chain snaps instantly.
The virus is just surrounded by biological dead ends.
Exactly. And the miracle of herd immunity is that the outbreak fizzles out, meaning the 10% who aren't vaccinated are still protected by the crowd.
And who is that unvaccinated 10%? It's premature infants, leukemia patients, symptomatic HIV patients who can't take live vaccines. The strong stand on the perimeter to protect the vulnerable in the center.
It's the ultimate act of community service, but maintaining that shield wall involves risks. And public health officials have to be relentlessly transparent about adverse effects following immunization, or AEFI.
The aim is maximum protection, minimum risk. Most vaccines are incredibly safe, but no vaccine is 100% safe for every human being on Earth. Biology is too diverse.
When we talk about AEFI, there are 2 massive buckets. The first is program errors. These are human mistakes in preparing, handling, or giving the vaccine.
Like an overdosage, or giving an oral vaccine as an injection, or mixing a powder with the wrong volume of diluent.
Historically, these are the most devastating because they are 100% preventable. There are tragic cases where a tired worker mixed a vaccine powder with a powerful muscle relaxant instead of sterile water just because the vials look similar. The results were catastrophic.
Which is why strict protocols are the bedrock of any campaign. Then we have the second bucket, vaccine reactions. Assuming the healthcare worker did everything perfectly, the biological response can still deviate.
Right. Clinical guidelines break these down into 6 categories. First, we have local reactions. Pain, redness, swelling at the injection site. These are mostly seen with live vaccines, like an accelerated BCG reaction.
Second are systemic reactions, whole body responses. They mimic a mild version of the infection, low-grade fever, malaise, maybe a temporary loss of appetite. Again, more common with live vaccines.
Third are allergic reactions. These are rare, hyperreactive responses to a component of the vaccine, like a gelatin stabilizer. They can be severe, like anaphylaxis.
Fourth are neurologic reactions, the ones that terrify parents, like post-vaccine encephalitis from older rabies vaccines or seizures from older whole-cell pertussis vaccines.
And then we hit the fifth and sixth categories, which are conceptually the hardest for the public to grasp: provocative and coincidental reactions.
Let's dig in here. What is a provocative reaction?
It's when a patient suffers an illness totally unrelated to the vaccine, but the physical stress of the shot provoked it to happen. The classic example is a child silently harboring an early wild polio infection. They get a DPT injection in their arm. The localized inflammation provokes the wild polio to settle into the nerves of that specific limb, causing paralysis right where the needle went in.
Wow, the vaccine didn't contain polio, but the needle stick provoked the underlying infection. That's wild. And then coincidental reactions. This is something that happens after a vaccine, but would have happened anyway even if the kid never got the shot. Terribly timed coincidence.
Exactly.
But I have to push back here on behalf of terrified parents. There's that logic fallacy, post hoc ergo propter hoc, after this, therefore because of this. If a healthy baby gets a shot on Tuesday and suffers an unrelated seizure on Wednesday night, you can't just tell a grieving mother it's a coincidence. She's going to blame the needle. How do you even prove it's a coincidence?
It's the most agonizing tightrope walk in pediatric communication. You can't dismiss their fear. To them, the cause and effect are totally obvious. To prove it scientifically, we use massive epidemiological databases. We look at the baseline background rate of disease in unvaccinated kids.
Right.
If a certain number of unvaccinated infants naturally suffer seizures in a given week, that's our baseline. When we roll out a vaccine, we track the data. If the seizure rate in vaccinated kids stays exactly at that baseline, we can mathematically prove the vaccine isn't causing an increase.
The event on Wednesday was going to happen regardless. But translating cold math into empathy is a huge challenge.
It requires immense patience and trust.
Okay, we've explored the standard mechanisms and risks, but patients are unique. What happens when we have to deviate from the norm? Let's look at special circumstances and how the rigid schedules adapt.
The guidelines are very specific. Let's start with premature infants. Their immune systems are very underdeveloped, but you base their schedule on their chronological age time since birth, not their gestational age.
You don't delay the protection because they need it. But there are caveats.
Yes. For example, Hep B isn't given on day 1 for preemies. It's delayed until they reach 2 months of age or hit 2 kilograms in weight. Also, if a preemie is in the hospital ward, you absolutely do not give them oral polio vaccine.
Because OPV is a live virus.
Right. It sheds in the stool for weeks. In a crowded NICU full of vulnerable preemies, shedding a live virus is way too dangerous.
We also have rules for splenic patients, people missing their spleens.
The spleen filters blood and fights off encapsulated bacteria. Without it, patients under 2 need aggressive coverage with polyvalent pneumococcal and quadrivalent meningococcal vaccines.
Other red flags include immunodeficiency, family history of seizures, or previous severe reactions. But to really understand this, we need to dive into the actual clinical schedules. These tables are deeply logical puzzles. Let's establish the routine baseline first.
Okay.
Between 12 to 15 months, healthy kids get MMR, chickenpox, and PCV. At 18 months, a booster of DPT and OPV, and 2 years plus, typhoid and meningitis.
That's the standard, but the complexity skyrockets with the routine immunization table for children infected with HIV.
This table is a masterclass in the tension between live and inactivated vaccines. It divides HIV-infected children into asymptomatic and symptomatic. I'm going to walk through the rows. First, BCG for tuberculosis at birth. Asymptomatic HIV?
Yes.
Symptomatic HIV. A hard NO.
Second, DPT at 6, 10, 14 weeks. Asymptomatic, yes. Symptomatic, also yes. Third, OPV or IPV. Asymptomatic is yes. Symptomatic is yes, no, conditional. Fourth, measles at 9 months. Asymptomatic is yes. Symptomatic is yes, no, conditional. Fifth, Hep B, firm, yes, S for both. And sixth, yellow fever. Asymptomatic is yes. Symptomatic is a hard NO.
It's a lot of data.
It seems chaotic. Why are BCG and yellow fever an absolute NO for symptomatic kids while DPT and Hep B are a safe yes and measles is a maybe? What's the rule?
The rule goes straight back to the vaccine types we defined. You have to look at what's in the vial. BCG and yellow fever are live attenuated vaccines. An asymptomatic HIV child still has enough CD4 T cells to control the weakened virus. But a symptomatic HIV child has a decimated immune system.
So the live vaccine would just replicate unchecked.
Exactly. It'd be pouring gasoline on a fire. It could cause a fatal infection. You can't give live vaccines to symptomatic HIV patients.
So why are DPT and Hep B fine for them? Because DPT uses toxoids and killed bacteria, and Hep B is recombinant. They are 100% inactivated. Nothing is alive, so they can't replicate. It might not generate a strong antibody response because the kid's immune system is so weak, but it absolutely won't cause an infection.
And the yes-no conditional for measles, why risk a live vaccine there?
That's an agonizing judgment call. Measles is live, yes. But wild measles is so contagious and so lethal to a symptomatic HIV child, the doctor has to weigh the severe risk of the vaccine against almost certain death if they catch wild measles.
Wow. It's a constant high-stakes balancing act. Before we leave the schedules, we have to look at the tetanus toxoid, or TT schedule, for women of childbearing age. It protects the mother, but also prevents neonatal tetanus in the newborn via transplacental passive immunity.
And immunologically, it beautifully demonstrates how booster doses compound memory.
Let's break down the timeline. TT1 is at first contact. Clinical protection, 0. It just primes the system. TT2 is 4 weeks later. Protection jumps to 3 years. TT3 is 6 months after that. Protection extends to 5 years. TT4 is 1 year later. Protection hits 10 years. And TT5, 1 year after TT4, provides protection for all remaining childbearing years.
It's a phenomenal demonstration of affinity maturation. The B cells see the toxoid, make weak antibodies, but with every booster, you force the immune system to refine. The B cells that produce the strongest antibodies survive and multiply. By TT5, you've curated an elite army of memory cells that will stand guard for decades.
Okay, we've mapped the biology and the schedules, but public health isn't practiced in a vacuum. We need to drop this blueprint into a massive real-world environment. This brings us to our case study, the Nigerian experience.
Designing a vaccine is only 10% of the battle. Delivering it across difficult terrain is a logistical mountain. The history of immunization in Nigeria is this unvarnished story of early triumph, collapse, and resilience.
It starts with the Expanded Program on Immunization, or EPI, adopted in Nigeria in 1978 to fight 6 core diseases. And initially it was inspiring. By 1990, they hit a staggering 80% coverage rate.
Hitting 80% in a country as vast as Nigeria is a monumental operational achievement. It requires immense coordination. But public health is fragile. That peak wasn't sustained.
Right. After 1990, there was a steep, devastating decline. The data points to economic recession, political instability, withdrawal of foreign donors, and poor funding. When I read this, it completely shattered the mountain climbing misconception of disease eradication. It's not a mountain where you plant a flag. It's a treadmill.
That's the perfect analogy.
I could never step off. The moment funding drops, the treadmill throws you backward.
And that treadmill highlights a physical vulnerability, the cold chain. We're talking about the physical reality of live vaccines needing strict, continuous refrigeration. If political instability causes the power grid to fail for 3 days, the cold chain breaks.
The live viruses just die.
Exactly. Millions of dollars of medicine degrades into useless water. A mother could walk 5 miles to a clinic. The nurse administers it perfectly, but if the cold chain was broken, the child gets 0 immunization.
So how did they rebuild? The history shows they used National Immunization Days, NIDs, in 1988 to boost coverage. But after the crash in the 90s, when foreign donors pulled back, the government had to take ownership.
It was a painful but necessary evolution. In 1996, they restructured and launched the National Program on Immunization, or NPI. It reflected true domestic ownership. But the transition was hard. The first 5 years saw poor implementation and low coverage again.
Which transitions us to their specific operational strategies. How do they get needles into arms?
2 primary strategies: fixed facility delivery, regular vaccines inside a clinic. But in rural areas, you also need outreach.
Packing up the coolers and bringing the services to isolated communities.
Exactly. They focused on routine immunization for kids under 1 year, periodic visits for women for the TT schedule, and booster doses for special populations.
But the operational concept that truly stopped me in my tracks was missed opportunities. We're not talking about people refusing vaccines. A missed opportunity is when an eligible child is inside a health facility, interacting with a worker, and leaves without a vaccine for an unacceptable reason.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Sometimes a kid comes in with a mild cough, gets treated, and the doctor just forgets to check their vaccination status, or absenteeism by workers. But the reason that shocked me was too few children to spend multiple dose vaccines. Let me make sure I understand this. A mother walks 2 hours with her baby, sits with the nurse, but if she's the only one there, the baby gets sent home unprotected because they refuse to open the vial.
It is an agonizing reality of medical logistics. Many live vaccines come in 10-dose or 20-dose glass vials as a powder. Once you mix it, a biological clock starts. It has to be used within 6 hours or thrown away. If a rural clinic only has a tiny allocation for the month, the worker faces an impossible choice. Open a 10-dose vial for one kid, throw away 9 doses, and risk running out when a measles outbreak hits later. They often tell the mother to come back next week when it's busier.
That is a tragedy of economics overriding biology. That child remains unprotected because of packaging. It highlights that the liquid vaccine is just one piece of the puzzle. The guidelines list 8 elements of immunization: vaccine supplies, cold chain, service delivery, data management, advocacy communication, surveillance, finance, and coordination. If any pillar collapses, the system fails.
Which is exactly why the Nigerian program introduced Immunization Plus days. They realized asking marginalized communities to participate in purely preventative medicine is a tough sell.
If you're struggling for clean water today, a vaccine for a future disease isn't a priority, so they created the Plus.
They bundled long-term protection with immediate relief.
They hand out ITNS mosquito nets, deworming pills, vitamin A, oral rehydration salts, physical bars of soap, and official immunization cards.
It revolutionizes the incentive structure. A mother might not walk 5 miles for an invisible polio vaccine, but she will absolutely walk for a high-quality mosquito net to protect her family tonight. The vaccine hitches a ride on the immediate value of the plus items. It's a masterclass in behavioral economics.
It's incredibly clever and deeply human. Well, we have covered a truly massive amount of ground today. Thank you for taking this intensive journey with us. From Jenner's crazy 18th century experiment through active and passive immunity, the intricate schedules for vulnerable populations, and the resilient history of Nigeria's EPI and NPI programs.
As we close out, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over. We saw how the strict need for a cold chain and multi-dose vials dictate who gets life-saving immunity. As you look toward the future of medicine, what if the next great breakthrough isn't a new biological antigen, but a revolution in logistics? Imagine a vaccine engineered to survive ambient desert heat for months without refrigeration. Imagine a vaccine printed on a stable, single-use micropatch, the size of a postage stamp, that requires no needles and no highly trained staff. A mother could just press it onto her child's arm like a sticker. How fundamentally would that alter the map of human survival?
A completely decentralized, unspoilable defense force. I love that vision of the future. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep exploring the microscopic miracles that keep us alive, and we will catch you next time.